did a lot of stuff in biology, but as you say, his real entrance kind of onto the more popular scene was in the early 2000s. His publication of what became a #1 New York Times bestseller, The God Delusion, which got published around the same time as a couple of other volumes, one by Christopher Hitchens and another one by Sam Harris and Dan Dennett. All of these things kind of coincided, and this idea, this title of the new atheism arose kind of as a result of some of these books. And the God Delusion is surprisingly not a lot of biology. There is some there, but it's generally speaking an attack on religious belief. And presenting kind of what he supposes is a rationality for atheism. And there are a lot of books that kind of talk about why this particular movement was successful at this particular time. So many people, if you think about, well, what else was going on in the early 2000s, right? 9/11, 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And we see kind of the dawn of religious extremism hitting the world in the United States, and a very, very tangible and impactful and very real way in which that affected our lives. And so I think some of that, people were already concerned about this. Well, what do we do about this, and how do we respond to this, and what is this? Because it was not necessarily something that people have interacted with much in the United States. And so this kind of cashed in a little bit on that. And Dawkins tends to lump the religions into this one major category of religion. He lumps kind of Islam, Muslim belief, and Christian belief, and Jewish belief in all under this giant umbrella of religion, which, there's there's debate to be had even there in terms of, can you really use, and you're trying to provide evidence, can you use some of the actions of one religion and then say that applies to all religions?
Mm-hmm.
There's some discussion that could be had there for sure. So he came onto the scene then, and along with these other guys, but it's Dawkins who kind of became the mouthpiece, as it were, for this kind of new atheistic movement. And it's interesting to consider, what's actually new about it. And I talk about this a little bit in the book, because atheism has been around for, forever, right? We could say.
Oh, yeah.
And there are certainly people out there who have done before this, who are well known for their writings on atheism, Bertrand Russell and David Hume, and some of these others who are perhaps more thoughtful, maybe even than Dawkins, about their atheism. But new atheism has a couple of things about it that were really interesting, and I think that helped it in Western United States. And one of these is the style of writing. If your average person is not going to sit down and plow through David Hume, I think.
No, right.
It's not necessarily light reading. It's not necessarily sarcastic and funny. And Dawkins, when you read him, if you read him just as a writer, is really pretty good. He's his humor. There's imagery. There's metaphor. He's very good at explaining concepts in ways that are intelligible and understandable, and as such, it's easy to read. And so things that are easy to read and palatable and simple and straightforward can easily capture your imagination and take hold that way. And so he and the other guys are been very good popularizers in ways that some of the more technical things that are out there that preceded them may not have kind of infiltrated into the more popular level, as it were.
How has he been received of late, even from the atheist side of things? I mean, it's in our minds, we tend to try to think of and reduce things to these monolithic groups, but there's a great variety among atheists, and you point that out in the book. But Dawkins became such an enormous figure that he and Hitchens, even Sam Harris, Hitchens, of course, has passed away. Harris is still active and now is actually doing a lot of work in meditation, but he does it from a secular neuroscientist viewpoint. But is Dawkins still a key representative? Is he somebody that other atheists still look to, or how has he been received among those people who reject the idea of the existence of God?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's hard to get a really good pulse on the world as a whole. There are certainly segments of the population that stand behind him wholeheartedly, and he founded what I think is the Humanist Society or the Humanist Association. I'm forgetting the exact name of it, and he has several million Twitter followers. It feels like every time I check, it's gone up a little bit.
Yeah.
So there are certainly people who would look at him and say, yes, I can sign on to what he says more or less 100%. But as you point out as well, there are plenty of atheists I know who just kind of go, oh, please don't think that I'm like that.
Really?
Yeah. And there are some who completely disavowed him and basically say he's an embarrassment to atheists. Some of my best friends that I had in grad school are non-Christians, and I wouldn't group them into this same category with Dawkins. Part of it is Dawkins is popularizer, but the new atheist movement is also very vitriolic in terms of it's not just atheists. People have characterized it as anti-theist.
Yeah.
It's very anti-religion. And
so he gets the antithesis right.
Sorry?
Yeah, I mean, in some way, he kind of gets the antithesis right. He realizes there's no middle ground here on this issue.
Yeah. But we're in today's culture, especially the millennial generation, is this kind of tends toward this more pluralistic, tolerant kind of thing and so this vehemence that he's portraying doesn't play as well in some circles. And so if you track some of the stuff he's said over time, it feels like he's kind of changed some of his tactics as he's gotten older a little bit and tried to kind of mollify some of these groups of people. And there are some examples of fairly left-leaning and liberal establishments kind of almost disavowing him, or at least one example that I know of him being uninvited from a radio talk show.
Oh my!
Because of some things he said about Islam, right? And so there's this tension between, do you stay, and this is as Christians, right? The whole idea behind, the Reform view on presuppositional apologetics, right, is there's this tension that exists between, do you stay true and follow through to what you actually say you believe, or do you kind of, say some things that you don't necessarily believe just to keep everybody happy? Because if you actually follow things through to their logical endpoint, sometimes it can lead to some really unpleasant places.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the Christian would say, well, yeah, that's because your worldview is not the correct worldview, and then we invite them to consider, the coherence of the Christian worldview. So it's a mixed bag, and you'll find people who, I mean, if you want to go to find a range of people, the internet is the place to go. There's some pretty nasty stuff out there on a variety of. Unfortunately, there are some Christians as well who are not necessarily demonstrating grace. And so I want to be careful to say this is not just the atheists, but
sure,
there's a whole spectrum of people in terms of where they are on Dawkins. But I guess to summarize, there are certainly a non-insignificant portion of people who would extol a lot of what he has to say.
Mm-hmm. How would you characterize his beliefs then? Does he advocate for a particular type of system? How would we get a handle on what he actually does believe, not just what he's against?
Yeah, that's a tricky question in some respects, because the New Atheist platform is it's almost it comes across more generally as a destructive platform. It's more anti something than pro something, and so it can be tricky to nail down, well, what exactly does he believe? So for example, some of his beliefs have morphed over time. So I think there was a very early period where he says something along the lines of, well, science really doesn't have anything to say about morality. And since then, he's changed his tact on that and says, well, we can now use science to develop morals. And I talk a little bit about how I don't think that's true in the book. Yeah. So it's changed a little bit over time. I think there are some things we can say that have stayed the same. So the big thing would be that he doesn't believe in anything beyond the natural physical world, right? So, and he uses that phrase, by the way, when he defines it himself, I think, how does he say it? Yeah, he believes that there's nothing beyond the natural physical world, no supernatural, no souls, no eternal life, none of those kinds of things. And so I would say that's probably the core belief that sits at the
just
the
pure
bottom.
Materialism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then some order and rationality within science that comes as a result of just natural laws that are inherent within this material world.